How I knew I was a healer was that my mother had me at a Methodist camp in Palestine, Texas, and we were late getting to the lecture that night, and I didn't want to go, and there was no place to sit, and I sat down at the foot of the woman who was speaking, who was a medical missionary to India, and I was in a trance. I knew I could do what she did and that it was my destiny. And for most of the early part of my life, I thought I would be a physician, a surgeon, and that I would be traditional. And life intervened, and I had a nervous breakdown when I was 21, and I realized that the mind was the key to everything. And after all the therapy I had and the therapy I learned when I became a psychotherapist, I was very lucky that in the early 70s, Houston, Texas had the first mind-body conference with all the great people that had written all the great books. And I went to it for 3 days. And after being with those people and knowing mind-body practice, the same blood that goes to your brain goes through every body part. And if you have the understanding of how to integrate those two, you can intervene on illness, you can heal illness, and you can help people they can't see. So that is my secret weapon for myself and other people. As you know, I'm 75 years old. Do I look it? No, I don't. I think I didn't make a deal with the devil. I just practiced 50 years of yoga and other things.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, that's how I knew. And I guess if that's my destiny, I get to stay alive for a while.
Yeah. So yeah. Awesome. Tell me, we're getting a weird feedback. Tell me, so there was something that I also heard. It seems like you might have been a daddy's girl.
Oh, I was born on my father's 30th birthday in fiction, and in real life I was born a few minutes after midnight, and it was during World War II, and we had wartime, and so they falsified my understanding of my birthday, and I celebrated for 18 years my birthday with my father. And he was my coach of everything to do. When I was a little girl, he said, "You're going to be the third generation female entrepreneur in our family. Here's some things you need to know. Here's some things you need to learn." And so basically he coached me all my life until he left when I was in my 50s, how to run a business, how to be smart, how to keep your, everything. So really, we got along pretty well when we weren't struggling. Because he was a man, I was a woman, different energies, different vision of life. And so, I was very fortunate that I was not a daddy's girl. I got to go through the life cycle with my father as a child, as an adolescent, as a young adult, and as a mature adult. And I was his caregiver, and I was actually with him when he died because that was his request. He said, "I don't want to die by myself." I said, "Call me on the inner plane, I'll be there." And that's exactly what happened. I breathed and prayed him to the other side. So it was a complete experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very fortunate. Yeah, I think it's essential because it's going to work on you whether you know it or not. And it's kind of like in the years when nobody knew how to read a map or have GPS, they were wandering around and they just didn't know where they were doing. So when I was introduced to astrology and saw what it could do, I thought, man, this is a really good tool for becoming more self-actualized, which by then I was in yoga, and I knew that was the whole point of being a yogi, was to be self-actualized. And when I became a Jungian, I understood that at midlife I would have a second wind or a second puberty, and I would need to become more self-actualized. So what astrology does is it gives you your basic tendencies, and if you could see yourself correctly, you would make some edits and some additions to yourself. So I believe you can be pretty much whatever you want to be, but you have to know what you're starting with. And astrology is a study of energy and cycles, and that's a pretty good thing to know because most of us, I think, believe that when you go from a water-breathing to an air-breathing organism at the time of birth, you get imprinted with a 10-planet picture, mandala, in the limbic system of your brain, and it's going to continue to change and evolve and develop based upon the interaction of you with the world and the planets and people. So I just think it's essential. It doesn't always protect you from everything, and it doesn't always reveal things, but at least energetically, it's kind of like a weather report. Is it raining? Take an umbrella. Is it beautiful? Get outside. So it's really, I think, a helpful planning tool. You have to learn to get out of your mind of the left hemisphere and get into your right hemisphere, which means yoga, meditation, music, all the things that soothe from that, you know, right hemisphere of your brain where your creative and spiritual healing come from needs to be a practice every day. First thing. That's the first thing you do. You download that before you do anything else. The second thing I would say is fear from the 12-step programs is false events appearing real. So it's an overactive imagination gone negative, and you have to slow the brain down with breathing. The next thing that I would suggest is a technique that I used for myself and suggest to other people. Most of the time when we get a fear, we haven't gone to the next step, which is to say to ourselves, what are the 4 things I'm going to do if this happens? So I get a little notebook and write my fear, and write down the 4 things I'm going to do if that happens, and then close the notebook and I'm not allowed to think of it anymore. So I let my right hemisphere, my creative sphere, dominate my left. And I was taught in graduate school that one of the ways to do this is you can say, stop. I have an updated message for you, and it changes the hemispheres. So you speak out loud to yourself. The thing we were told never to do is what we need to do. And I would also know that as a female, we have a tendency to multitask, and that is not a very happy, healthy habit because it shortens your telomeres. And so one of the things women need to learn to do is take things off their plate, one thing at a time, go slower, and not have excessive self-standards so that we can see what we did accomplish and not what we didn't. You have to look at where you've come, not where you're headed. So it's mental discipline is my take on everything. And it's really about not letting the ruminating left hemisphere, the should and masturbate mind take over.
Wow.
And I have 10,000 techniques. That's why I'm still working, because I'm still learning. And I would just say it's a practice that you have to have of optimism. And, you know, one of my favorite sources is the book Learn to Optimism by Martin Seligman. And he gives you three tests to ascertain your optimism. And he gives you a formula of how to apply optimism so that you do not do what we just heard from you and everybody else does that. We all do it. Mm-hmm. You have to say stop. And say, this was, in the 1960s, this was a technique of mind control. And you always said stop, and you edited it, and you said you don't have a negative thought, or you never have a negative speech, because basically that sets the whole circuitry in your body for what you don't want, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Good, that's what you're supposed to do. But I would just say, as a yogi, what you do is you count your breaths. And if you've inhaled to a count of 2, you pause for 2, and then you exhale for a count of 4. You double your exhale. That goes from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response. And it's recommended that you do 10 sets of the breathing, and then your brain is set the way you want it. It's probably easiest to illustrate it.
Okay. Yes.
Let's assume that I'm going to breathe into a count of 2. So you breathe in through your nose, and you use the belly. Then you hold for a count of 2, and then you exhale for a count of 4. You repeat that 10 times. I always inhale peace, and I exhale pain, so that after 10 breaths, I'm usually very calm, and then I can resume what it is I've planned to do. The other thing I always do is, you don't hear it now because I thought it would be too weird, but in every room in my life, I have the sound of water, oceans, and Om. And I coordinate my breathing and my thinking to the sound of those 3 things simultaneously, because I find that the ear is the first of the sense organs to mature in utero. The work of Dr. Tomatis in France made us available to that idea. And so we know that at 6 months of gestation, our ear is hearing, and so we need to use the sound to amplify our relaxation. I have like 10,000. I'm like a research nutball. You know, if I were to be dead and have a tombstone, which will never happen, a tombstone part, I would say, Nan Hall Linky, you didn't have to tell her twice. I'll try anything. And I know lots of smart people, and I ask lots of questions, and they suggest things to me, and I try anything, including, when you asked me to do this, I didn't have this set up, and I couldn't do it. So we had to delay it a day until I could get the genius that could remotely turn all this stuff on for me. So, I'll try anything. And, a lot of people are risk averse, and I've learned a lot from those people because they don't focus reality the same way I do. And what they say is, I'm afraid to do it. I said, I'm afraid not to do it. So, I have to slow myself down by their method, and they have to speed themselves up by my method. But when we go too fast, we lose ourselves, and then we don't have any emotional intelligence. So the interpersonal and intrapersonal emotional intelligences that are innate can be enhanced with technique. And astrology helps you. I remember when I was younger, I used to have Keep My Ephemeris, which is the book that has all the numbers of people's planets, in the trunk of my car. And I'd go out socially, and people say, oh, you have that book? Let's look people up. And, you could profile people pretty accurately. I mean, you're not stereotype them, but profile them. And it gave you an understanding of who you were dealing with so that you didn't have to trial and error. Experience. I don't know. I think most people are pretty crazy at any age if they don't use these techniques.
That's true.
I have clients from age 15 to age 94, and I don't see any difference unless you use these techniques. You have to have a spiritual practice that calms you down, recenters you, and balances your brain. And I got a formula when I was in graduate school that I was not doing. My professor said, man, there is a formula for a balanced life. Now, you don't have to tell me.
So great. This is part of our balance.
I said, what is it? He said, in every 24-hour period, you are to be productive 8 hours, restful 8 hours, and playful 8 hours. And I said, I don't do that. And he says, well, it shows. I said, well, I will spend the next 7 years, because that's how long it takes for every cell in my body to renew, working on that project systematically. And I bet you 7 years from now, I'll do it. And by then I did, and that was 30-something years ago. So when I deviate from that plan, I can tell. I get like agitated, irritated, depressed, all kinds of things. And usually for me, I just need to play more. Serious people who like to learn forget to play. So I have playmates so that we are always constantly playing. So, you can achieve balance, because if you find your neutral, which is what is called the grounding bar for your electricity in your house, then you don't swing from extreme to extreme. So it's really about discipline, routine, balance. In fact, years ago, I was at an Edgar Cayce retreat, and there was an incredible master dowser there. I even have dowsing things that I bought from him and took a dowsing course. And then he made all kinds of stuff that you put around your computers and electronics that you don't absorb all of that. So, yeah, I believe that's true. And I believe that we're a responsive, receiver. That's how astrology works. It's downloaded into the limbic system of our brain, whether we know it or not. So yes, I absolutely believe all that affects people, which is why I think it's real important to have practices of intentional solitude and silence and breathing and slow movement and all those things that people are beginning to do pretty regularly now. I think it's great. I just got ahead of the curve. I started 50 years ago in February. So, I fell into it. And again, somebody told me about all this stuff, and I went, I'm going to go try it all. Well, I never stopped. I was afraid to. There's always a sport 5 generations ahead of everybody else. And so it's an experiment. And if we survive, it's natural selection. When those finches that Darwin studied, were able to adapt, they survived. And of course, as a master bird watcher, I know that the birds are the descendants of the dinosaurs. And so if we study the mating behavior of birds, we know why people are not doing well. Because in the bird behavior, and I've watched like 10 hours of a bird's mating, the females choose, the males audition. The males need to sing, dance, build the nest, decorate the nest, feed the young, sit on the eggs. And so a lot is required of men because they attach through action and through giving. And so what we know is that's why the dinosaurs became the birds. They used that mating behavior, so it was survival of the fittest. But I've studied so many things, and I'm a mind-body therapist, and I believe that anything that's true in the body and the mind is true in the psyche. So I've also studied primatology. Pick something I didn't study. If I didn't study it, it's because I didn't find it yet. So I think what we do is we just say we're a very complicated but simple organism, and if we know the rules of how to manage ourselves, things go pretty smooth, except when they don't. And you can recover better because you know how to do that. I'm not sure we can stay in ease. I just think we have to return to it, because sometimes life is so traumatic and so problematic. And there's a system that is available now. It's called Struggle Well, because all we know is post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, Struggle Well is a system that has a website and a book that says that whatever did not kill you makes you stronger. And so if you can return to that idea that I am stronger than this situation and I'm resilient, and load some optimism in, you don't ever get so far out on a limb that you want to jump off. I also believe that the spiritual nature of our species is not like that of the chimpanzee. The chimpanzee is in a 50-person support community, and so should we be. So we need to have physical closeness and verbal trust with 50 people in our life, so that when we have that community of caring, loving, kind, helpful people, we never really get so far out. I also believe that flow is about returning constantly to our intention rather than where we find ourselves when we're off balance. And I think the other thing is, I'm going to sound like my Sunday school teacher here, you have to have a daily spiritual practice. When I wake up in the morning, I do that before I get out of the bed, whether it's my daily word that I've read every day since 1970, or my praying for all the people who are important in my life, or breathing. That's what I do before I start my day, because it's about making an energy deposit with yourself so you don't run out of gas or run off the road. And I think that that's a habit that people don't often take the time to do, because they think they can do themselves later. And I think you have to put yourself first. I think extreme self-care is the secret to living well. You just start it again. And when you fail, you start it again. And I write everything down. I'm not into electronic calendars because nobody can use them. So I have the printed kind where you write it down, and when it's written down, my unconscious has agreed to it, and I can read it if I forget, and I just follow the path. And so everything that makes me feel better, whether it's going to a movie or getting a manicure, I do it on a regular routine, and I remove choice, because I've known, listening to people be interviewed and reading hundreds and millions of biographies, that when you ask somebody, how did you accomplish this amazing thing? They said, what do you mean? I had no choice. So the removal of choice is how you accomplish and succeed and stay sane, actually. So that's kind of the simple formula. You have to succeed. Just do it. Remember that crazy thing with Nike? Nike had it right. Just do it. No excuses. So I think, nobody does anything perfectly or exactly the way that we're going to do it. So you have to love and forgive yourself and give yourself a break and start again. Keep going. What does Winston Churchill say? When you're walking through hell, keep walking. That's my motto. The thing I'm most passionate about is the healing power of ritual website, which I have had 3 years to not be able to write in. And I have done ritual classes for 25 years because it's a way to use the right hemisphere and collective loving kindness to change. And I do ritual classes on the winter solstice and the summer solstice, and people come together with what they're trying to accomplish, and they do heart art symbolically and share it with other people so that it becomes an affirmative part of their consciousness.